Should you have a bias when day trading? Should you believe that the market's going to go up or it's going to go down? Is it detrimental? Is it a emotion? We're going to talk about the day trading bias and why you got to get rid of it, my friends. Get rid of the day trading bias and focus on the trades. Let's go. What's going on, guys? Patrick here. Today I want to talk about the day trading bias. I see this so many times, and it's funny because I do really have a very unique view of the market compared to a lot of other traders out there. And why do I have this unique view? Not because I'm a guru or I think I'm the best trader in the world. Every day on the live stream, I get to interact with thousands of traders every day. Tune into the live stream and we get to basically see the overall daily bias. We get to see kind of what people are thinking, what they're talking about, what their focus is, and their ideas for trades. So it's a very unique view compared to someone who really has no exposure to seeing what other traders are thinking. And I would say the majority of days where I see that the chat is primarily bearish or the chat is primarily bullish, the market does the exact opposite. And I've talked about this before, the chat indicator. There's a reason that 90% of day traders lose. So today was a perfect example of that. The market on Friday sold off. A lot of people were very bearish going into open. We then had a big squeeze at open. We pulled back and the market then pushed up to the high of day on Friday before pulling back. So very interesting setup. I was even kind of like, oh man, after that big sell-off on Friday, is this really going to hold up at these levels or are we going to start to pull back? And it was interesting to see as well, the chat very much feeling the same way. And we saw the exact opposite of the majority of the chat basically believing that we were going to sell off after that move on Friday. So that comes down to a bias. Like, what really is a daily bias? If you think about it, having a bias really comes down to an emotion. It's an emotion that you have. You create this bias based on what the market is doing and you're watching it and you're like, oh, okay. You're reacting emotionally to the moves in the market. You're not focused on the technicals. You're not focused on the levels. You're not focused on the idea. You're just more so focused on the emotion that either the market's going to go up or the market's going to go down, which we know, there's a 50-50 chance. The market goes up, it goes down. We know that. But what we have to avoid is trying to create this emotion, this bias that stops us from taking a profitable trade or stops us from getting out of a trade because we have a bias, right? How many times has this happened to you where you enter a trade and all of a sudden it goes against you and your emotion is like, well, it's going to go up. It's going to go up. I see it. I believe it. I know it. It's going to go up. And you hold and you hold. It gets to your stop loss and you're like, well, the market's going to go up today. Like, it's going to go up. And all you're doing is now just basically trying to get emotional validation because you have this bias. You're like, well, the market's got to go back up because I think it's going to go up. And you're just now creating this emotional reason to why you're holding on to a loser while the market continues to go lower. So the big problem here is when you have a bias, especially like a short-term bias, or if you think the market's going to pop or it's going to drop. I mean, I've had this issue as well. Like, when I make these videos, I'm not talking to you. I'm basically talking from experience, right? Like, I'm not telling you that I know that you have bias and I don't, because I know that I also have bias. Like, this is an experience. Everything that I have on the channel, I've experienced. Everything that you're going through as a trader, I've experienced. 7 years of basically experiencing every type of emotion when it comes to trading. Like, I have days where I just can't figure it out. Like, the market's going up, I get long, it crashes. And then I have days where the market's going down, I get short. Everybody has those days. But what we really have to understand is when we start to create an emotional bias, we cloud our judgment. Instead of looking at the chart and being like, oh, look, there's resistance. When we're so bullish, and I have this issue, like, I do this. This is not me saying that I'm any better than you, but this happens to me. I get into a trade, the market's pushing up, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna break. It's gonna break. And then it gets stuck. And I'm like, well, it's gonna break. And then I hold. And now my emotion takes over because I can clearly see that we're stuck at a pivot, that we're stuck at resistance, we're stuck at whatever level. I can clearly see that. But the problem is my bias has basically taken over and made it so that I can't actually execute anymore. I'm now just hoping and praying that it's going to break through that level because why? Because, oh, it's going to break. Like, I know it's going to break. It's got to break, right? Like, oh, emotionally, I think it's going to break. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. We want to avoid creating an emotional bias to why the market's going to go up or why the market's going to go down. We simply want to be able to look at the chart and be like, hey, there's resistance here. There's a level here. There's liquidity there. Whatever it is, there's a trend line. There's something about why the market's going to go to this level. The VWAP is at that level. There's certain technical reasons to why we believe the market's going to go up or go down. It's not based on our bias. It's not based on, I wake up in the morning and I see a headline news that the market's crashing and I think it's a good day to get short. How many times have we had the market pulling back in pre-market and then all of a sudden at open, it goes straight to the moon? That happens over and over because people start to get emotionally biased. And I know that this has happened to you because it's happened to me. If it hasn't happened to you and you're watching the video right now, you're lying to yourself. And I know that you got to be honest. You got to be like, hey, did I not take profit on that trade because I was technically focused on a level? Or did I not take profit on that trade because I thought it was going to go higher? I emotionally was like, well, it's got to go higher. I'm up $2,000. You know, I'm not taking profit. I'm getting greedy. Like there's all this emotion to reasons why I'm not taking profit when ideally I can look at the chart and be like, hey, look, clearly there's resistance. Like clearly there's a reason that I should probably take profit here. So trying to get rid of that emotion is the hardest part of trading. 7 years later, I still battle it. 7 years later, I'm still going through those issues, right? You're never going to get through it. Like you're never going to get to a point where you're just not going to have emotion anymore. But you have to get to a point where you can basically, I wouldn't say execute like a robot, but you have to get to a point where you can fight those emotions, control those emotions. You can't ever get rid of those emotions entirely, but you start to create ideas and rules and things like, hey, you know, if I'm up big on the day, I made a bunch of money in the morning, there's nothing wrong with walking away. Because how many times have you been up big in the morning? You end up forcing it, you know, that emotional like bias, like it's the winner till, right? Like, oh, I can't lose. I can't lose. Like I'm winning. I'm going to keep on winning. And just all of a sudden you're now down and you end up losing all the profits because emotionally you were basically biased that you couldn't lose anymore, right? Like there's no way I'm going to lose, but nothing changes. Just because you had 2 profitable trades in a row does not mean that the next trade for sure is going to be profitable. The same way that if you take a losing trade, it doesn't mean that the next trade is going to be a loser. So that's, again, like emotional. If we are winning, we have to be able to step back and be like, hey, okay, we're winning. That's great. We're making profit. But there's a chance that if we start to get a little too aggressive, if we keep buying the top over and over, we're going to end up buying the top. We're going to get dumped on. So again, that's like emotional bias to winning and losing. Same way that if you're having a losing day and you're sitting there and you're like, well, I just, you know, I'm going to keep on trying. I'm going to keep on fighting it. I'm going to keep on trying to short. I'm going to keep on trying to go long, even if the market's doing the exact opposite of what I want it to do. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep trying. And then all of a sudden, you know that you end up blowing up because you're fighting the market and that emotional bias takes over. Again, you can't ever get rid of the emotions. 100%, you will never get rid of the emotions that every human being has. Those emotions are natural. You know, greed is natural, not just with money, but we're greedy with like how much food we get. We're greedy with like, you know, if there's only a limited supply of water, like somebody wants more water than somebody else. People are always going to be inherently greedy. They're going to always want more. That's the, you know, biggest emotion. Also the emotion of like wanting to always be right. I mean, I battle that as well. You know, that bias where like, oh, you know, I know I'm going to be right. I got to be right. Like, this is going to push. It's going to go higher. It's going to go higher. And then all of a sudden it doesn't go higher and you're sitting there and you're in the red now because you were too greedy. You were too focused on the market only going higher that you weren't going to take profits. So those are all very real emotion, very real things that we battle. And those are things that we have to stop battling. We got to stop battling these emotions. We got to stop creating these bias based on, you know, emotional reasons to why we're taking a trade or why we're not taking a trade and all these things. Even though we think, oh, the market can't go higher. Well, if there's a good setup, if we have a good setup, why not take a trade? Like if the market wants to go higher, take a trade. If the market's giving you a good setup, if it fits your overall risk parameters, it fits your overall trading style, if that's happening, why not take a trade? So you really have to ask yourself, like, are you taking a trade based on purely emotion or are you not taking a trade purely on emotion? That's also a real thing. Like not taking a trade because you emotionally are like, well, it can't go higher, right? Like that's an emotional bias because the market can't go higher because I emotionally feel like it can't go higher. So are you not taking a trade just because you don't think the market can go higher and it's giving you a breakout, it's giving you a setup? Or are you not taking a trade because technically it's not telling you that it's a good setup? So these are all very real things. You got to get rid of the emotional bias. in terms of being bearish, being long, whatever it is. You got to get rid of these bias in general, my friends. Get rid of the bias and focus on the trading.